Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. The Humanities Center discussion series today is Come to the Table, Radical Hospitality and Communities of Belonging. I will briefly introduce our panelists and make some opening remarks, but first I would like to acknowledge that the land that USD is located on is the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, and we pay respect to the citizens of the Kumeyaay Nation, both past and present, and their continuing relationship to their ancestral lands. Welcome, my name is Lindy Villa, and I'm the Humanities Center coordinator, and I'm also the coordinator of tonight's series. For the remainder of the sessions, Esteban Del Rio will be the moderator. So he is speaking tonight, so I am doing the introductions. Tonight, we begin with a discussion series where we explore the concept of radical hospitality. We hope to illuminate intersectional voices and perspectives on this investigation of what it means to belong, to be welcomed, and to welcome the others through the practice of radical hospitality. Following sessions will include explorations of race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality, national origin, homelessness and housing insecurity, and health and ability. Our session today will be an introduction to the series and feature 3 speakers. Following the presentations, we'll open up the discussion and begin Q&A. At that time, you may enter your questions in the chat box or just raise your hand to join in the conversation. Also, I will be turning on the live transcription tonight. So if you want to enable that service, you can do so through the meeting controls. So it's my great pleasure that I introduce our speakers tonight. First, we will hear from Michael Lovette-Colyer. Michael serves as the Assistant Vice President and Director of University Ministry. Prior to coming to USD 14 years ago, he worked at Santa Clara University in the Humanities Center for Jesuit Education, where he led the university's immersion programs and oversaw the Discover Project, an initiative funded by the Lilly Endowment to promote the theological exploration of vocation. Michael earned his PhD from USD School of Leadership and Education Sciences. He also holds an MBA from Santa Clara and a Master of Divinity from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley. Following Michael, we will hear from Esteban Del Rio. Esteban is the professor in the Department of Communication Studies, and he's completed his 30th year teaching at USD. He served as Associate Provost for Inclusion and Diversity from 2012 till 2018, before taking sabbatical and returning as the Chair of Sociology and advisor to the Provost for Faculty Affairs. Esteban met his wife Alicia while both were undergraduates at USD, and they live on Mount Helix with their daughters, Lucia and Ida. Following Esteban, we will hear from Lisa Nunn. Lisa has been a professor in the Sociology department since 2009. She is also currently the director of USD's Center for Educational Excellence. Her research focuses on the ways that institutions, such as schools, shape our lives, our futures, and even our identities. That is, our understanding of who we are in the world. Her newest book just came out in February, called College Belonging: How First Year and First Generation Students Navigate Campus Life. So with that, let's begin. I will stop sharing and we will start with Michael.
I'm just sharing my screen, and while I do that, I want to start by thanking you all for joining us today. I'm really honored to be a part of this series and grateful for the invitation. I'm especially grateful for the chance to be a part of this first session, sharing the Zoom stage with Dr. Del Rio and Dr. Nunn, 2 of the most impressive teachers and scholars at USD, more importantly, 2 of the best and nicest people I've ever met. So it's a real honor to be with you. I want to start by just showing 2 images. I'm not sure who it was that selected the image we saw just a moment ago, kind of the image that has been used to promote this series of events. You see it there. And then I want to pull up another image, which I think does a better job of capturing what we might mean by radical hospitality, or even just hospitality, because of course, the thing missing in the picture on the left are the people. And even though that looks like a very interesting and probably going to be a wonderful meal that's served, when we talk about hospitality, we have to remember that we're talking about something that happens among people. So I'd like to talk more about this, but before I do that, I also just want to say a few words about key terms. It's been a few years now here at the University of San Diego where we've been using the term radical hospitality. As many of those of you know who have been around a few years, we usually use it at the start of the new academic year when we're welcoming new students and their families, or what we call Ole Weekend. More recently, a lot of us have even worn t-shirts that have the terms radical hospitality written on them, so that we're very explicit and direct for our newest community members about what we're trying to do. The idea, as I understand it, is to make sure that people know what we're trying to do, and so that they might feel it more intentionally. I think the term radical hospitality is a good one, and I'm happy that we use it in this way. However, I also want to offer a caution about it and what it can become if we're not intentional and discerning. Radical hospitality, the word radical, as many of you probably know, comes from the Latin word for root. When we use the term in this way, we might ask then, what is the root, or what grounds our commitment to hospitality? What is it then that grounds our commitment to making sure that our newest community members feel and know that they matter and that they belong here on our campus? So what grounds our commitment to hospitality? The answer, it seems to me, is human dignity. As a Catholic university, one of our most core tenets, our most essential beliefs, is that each and every one of us, created in the image and likeness of God, and thus simply by nature of being human, we possess infinite dignity and worth. St. John Paul II once described Christianity as an attitude of deep amazement at the profound dignity and worth of the human person. In other words, human dignity. Human dignity is at the very heart of what it means to be a Catholic Christian or to be in the Catholic Christian tradition. This way of thinking about human dignity flows directly from that tradition and delightfully is not limited to it. So in other words, while those of us who identify as Catholic or see ourselves as a part of that tradition recognize this spiritual, religious, or faith-based grounding as the source of human dignity, that dignity extends well beyond. Each and every person of every faith background and no faith background and every other identity and perspective possesses infinite dignity and worth. There are no limits to human dignity. Now that's radical. I'd like to suggest that grounding our commitment to hospitality in this way is imperative, or else we might just end up offering hospitality that could be classified as warm or impressive or unforgettable. All of those qualifiers might be good, but I don't see how there's any realistic difference in them from what Disney Cruise Lines tries to offer or the Hotel del Coronado. Surely the hospitality we seek to offer is about more than exceeding our customers' expectations. Yes, our hospitality is about recognizing, reverencing, and celebrating each and every one of our students' human dignity. I suspect that if people think about the term at all, which they probably don't, especially during Ole Weekend when they're simply trying to make it through the move-in process, but if they think about it at all, most probably see the word radical as a synonym for excellent or extreme or superlative. And that's exactly where my caution comes in. While I think offering the highest level of hospitality is a very good thing and an okay goal to strive for, it is not the goal. It's not why the University of San Diego exists, and it's ultimately not what we're trying to do as a university. Instead, the answers to those questions is to honor human dignity. We recognize, reverence, and celebrate the human dignity of our students out of a commitment that they will learn from being a part of a culture that does that, so that they will do it as they move out into the world. In a real sense, this is radical. One other caution to the term radical hospitality is that it can imply a subtle or not so subtle power differential. if I or our group decides that we're going to extend hospitality to someone else, then who's in charge of that decision? I often think about it in terms of when I visit my in-laws. Even though my partner and I have been married for 15 years and together longer than that, and even though we've spent countless holidays with her family, when I'm in their house, I know it's not my house. And as much as I feel warmly welcomed, I know that I'm a guest and I behave accordingly. So truly radical hospitality would flip that so that the people who are guests can start to take ownership and feel that it is truly their house. If we were to approach that level of human dignity, there would be no decision about extending it or not. It would simply be an act of love and a recognition of the worth of the person in front of us. So to reemphasize, I'd like to highlight the fact that the radical hospitality we offer should be rooted in human dignity. And that common recognition will break down the power differential that can skew what we're really trying to do. With that said, let me go back to that picture of the meal. And it's a picture from Tijuana Spring Breakthrough, a program run by the Office of University Ministry, where I have the pleasure of being a part of. And this is a picture of a group of students at the start of Tijuana Spring Breakthrough. The heart of the experience, it's a 6-day experience, usually during spring break, is 3 days in which our students engage in what's called a homestay. So they live and share life with local families from Tijuana. The student in the middle of the screen with the boy on his back, his name is Chris, and the boy on his back is Diego. And this was our students being paired with their host family as they were about to enter into those 3 days. The way it works in Tijuana is that our students are matched with their family at the Saturday afternoon mass celebrated in the local parish. And it's an elaborate, beautiful ritual where we line up the students on one side of the church and the host families line up on the other side. And as the very final part of the mass, myself or another staff member calls forth pairs of students, in this case, Chris and a student on their extreme right named Will. They come forward, the host family walks over, the matriarch of the community then introduces the students to the family and says, "This is your new family. Este es su familia nueva." The whole church bursts out in applause. There's wild clapping and much joy. It never ceases to take my breath away and brings tears to my eyes because, in a sense, this is what we ought to be doing each and every day, is redefining what we mean by family. This is your new family. That's radical hospitality. After that happens, then all the Americans, the US students stand up front, the community prays for us, and that's when we have the meal. What's really beautiful during the meal is when it ceases to become clear who is the host and who is the visitor, and we engage collectively, collaboratively, and mutually in taking turns, serving, being served, leading, following, sharing our gifts with one another. And then there's usually dancing involved. But this is my favorite image of all time. This is Chris 3 years later, that's Diego. Diego and his mom have documentation status, so they could come to Chris's graduation day here at USD to celebrate that special day with him. I was there that day and I saw them. I was so happy that they were a part of the celebration. I asked them why it was so important for them to be present, and they said, because Chris is a part of our family. That's radical. That's radical hospitality, rethinking who's a part of our family, allowing our notions to be stretched much further than the logic of Disney Cruise Lines or any luxury resort would want us to. Stretching our imagination, especially through the concept of human dignity. So I think that's where I'll pause. And I'm not sure if it's Dr. Nunn or Dr. Del Rio that goes next, but I'll stop sharing my screen so you can do so as you like.
When I tell people out in my community that I have led equity and diversity efforts at a Catholic university as a professor and as an administrator, I often hear something like, "Oh, that's a tough job." Time and again, I find myself being challenged to make the case for how Catholic colleges and universities represent perhaps the most promising and urgent contexts for equity and anti-oppression practice. From a Catholic perspective, the path is clear to me using ideas from across the tradition. Diversity can be understood as an expression of the beauty of God's creation, and inclusion as a way to achieve structural mercy and solidarity. Equity becomes the search for social justice through the practice of radical hospitality, inspired by Jesus and the people who joined with him as disciples in the Gospels. In other words, diversity, inclusion, equity arrive from the very heart of Catholic higher education, not in spite of it. Most people of goodwill seem to understand and accept the overwhelming data derived from secular contexts that support what is known as inclusive excellence in higher education. Study after study show that diverse and equitable environments produce the best outcomes, including student learning. Findings remain consistent across sectors, from profitability in business to student learning here in education. Higher education has grappled with this emergent knowledge for decades by creating centers, launching initiatives, hiring new administrative personnel, and mandating trainings. A public awareness of student discontent with institutional racism and bias has also grown over the years. As we persist through another academic year, and a year like no others, there has never been a more opportune time for Catholic colleges and universities to confront the sin of racism and the struggle for equity from their most foundational logics of institutional Catholic identity, mission, charism, and educational traditions. In the fall of 2019, the American Council on Education released a study about racism on college campuses titled "Speaking Truth and Acting with Integrity." Taking the 2015 racial and intersectional justice protests at the University of Missouri as a focus, the report provides a guide for university leaders, it's pretty much written for presidents, to respond effectively to a racial incident or crisis. At Mizzou, a culture of institutional racism and a series of racist episodes sparked student protest, if you remember, culminating the resignation of the president and inspiring a nationwide movement that saw students organizing on campuses in 2015 and 2016. Students nationally issued demands, several Catholic colleges and universities, including this one at USD. 2015 also marked the beginning of 3 consecutive years of increases in the number of incidents involving hate crimes in the United States. Probably 4, I haven't checked the data. Counties that held rallies for Donald Trump in 2016 saw a 226% increase in hate crimes. At the same time, college campuses have been targeted by white supremacists and conservative media for promoting diversity and equity, often by Catholics who don't want to see that happen. The ACE study suggests how campus racial crises that have become more frequent in recent years really emerged from entrenched slow-motion crises of institutional racism pervasive in American higher education. It recommends that campus leaders engage in active listening without defensiveness, speak from the heart with candor, transparency, and consultation, and act with others to build community around inclusion with a democratic style. Catholic colleges and universities would be wise to follow these recommendations, but leaders should be careful not to limit themselves to adopting best practices created from secular contexts. Rather, our students, faculty, staff, and community partners deserve the confidence and courage from our campus leaders, from our professors, from employees, to confront racism and other forms of bias from the center of our Catholic character. First, our tradition calls us to approach racism as a sin that continues to exist in our world and in our lives, rather than as an episodic crisis that must be managed like any other public relations problem. While some argue that they were late to the game, the 1979 U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops taught that racism is a sin in brothers and sisters among us. In our own time, open wide our hearts from the conference, ask Catholics to engage with the root causes of racism, which operate institutionally and systematically. Catholic higher education can avoid the artifice of easy solutions and public relations window dressing by confronting the institutional and systematic racism that operates on our campuses and taking up anti-oppression practice as a mission-level priority. Second, Catholic colleges and universities can cultivate a culture of accompaniment on campus, meeting prophetic voices with authentic compassion and hope for solidarity. During these times of heightened racial, ethnic, and religious tension, the voices of social justice can manifest as urgent and impatient. Rather than create distance from those asking for change, campus leaders can instead listen intently with dialogue and compassion. Such an approach can lead to solidarity, which requires that we set aside our hammers and clubs and seek a common place to work outward from. When tactics become confrontational, as they have on our campus and many other campuses, the practice of accompaniment becomes more necessary. In 2007, Dolores Huerta told NPR that when conditions produce confrontation or conflict, quote, that means that there are truths that have to be addressed on each side of the conflict, end quote. Pope Francis has been a consistent proponent of accompaniment in his ministry as a salve in turbulent times. It is in a divided world and sometimes a divided church. Francis teaches us that accompaniment represents a deeper way to act with others on our campus, that we need to be, quote, capable of walking at people's side, of doing more than simply listening to them, end quote. Third, Catholic colleges and universities must take the concept of radical hospitality seriously. When I was given the opportunity a few years ago to ask Cardinal Joseph Tobin about the practice of accompaniment, he conveyed the story from the Gospel of John, where Jesus first joins with those who would become his disciples by asking, "What do you seek? What do you seek?" That's different from Matthew. Matthew says, "Come follow me." And John is, "What do you seek?" Tobin told me, quote, "The gospel is essentially the good news of the possibility of meeting with the person who happens to be the loving God who comes to meet us," end quote. He told that to me. It was pretty cool. God's accompaniment of us as one of us is a powerful expression of radical hospitality. God meets us where we are as we are. And it may not be theologically sound, but I kind of personally believe that God's time walking among us changed God. How could it not? You know, there's omniscience in theory, but there's omniscience based on evidence, you know? Radical hospitality transcends, as Michael was suggesting. Radical hospitality transcends the traditional limits of welcome, which rely on roles and power dynamics of host and guest. Instead, it asks us to create a culture of encounter, in Francis's words, where compassion leads to an openness to possibility and the joy of hope in our hearts and minds. We seem to enjoy welcoming people to our campus, to our classrooms, and our departments. We congratulate ourselves when we see greater diversity among those we welcome. But radical hospitality asks for something more, an openness to change in our habits, in our assumptions, our proclamations, and our programs that must result from the encounter with each other. The notion of radical hospitality asks Catholic colleges and universities and USD to be open to the change that the culture of encounter brings. That is what is radical about this orientation to hospitality. It holds change at its center. Thank you.
This is a really great conversation. And the piece that I have to add is wholly centered on this idea of belonging. So I'm going to share my screen too. I'm a very visual person, so I created visuals for you to follow along as I'm talking, but I also want to say that I completely respect you having your cameras off, and those of you that still have them on, you are welcome to turn them off and just listen and engage without feeling like the spotlight's on you. I'll take the spotlight for the next few minutes. You do as you please, but I hope you're listening. So I'm a sociologist, and I want to offer a sociological understanding of what belonging is, how it works, maybe how we can all get a little more of it. And I'm drawing on the ideas of this man, Emile Durkheim. He's one of our classic sociological theorists, and his ideas are good about this. But I also want to say that I'm very conflicted about academics like myself, deep reliance on the ideas that come from Western thinking and Europe in particular. And here I am drawing my insights from the ideas of a white Frenchman dead 100 years, but here we are. I just sort of want to acknowledge that. And if anyone here has readings or other forms of knowledge that you can share with me about how belonging works or how communities work that come from different traditions than maybe I'm familiar with, I am all ears. But here we go. Let's draw on what Emile Durkheim had to say. He had some good things to say. So he thinks about society, sociologists think about society as this thing that lives above us, beyond us, outside of us, but also we are entangled in it, so it lives within us. Society is not separate from us, right? Communities are not separate from the members that comprise the community, but it is also something greater than the sum of individual members, right? It is its own entity, it is its own thing, societies, communities. And the way that all of us individual humans are glued together with social glue, right? Bonding us together into these communities and collections, societies. Durkheim argues that the glue is in fact social bonds that are reinforced through interactions, but it's not just interactions, it's also shared norms. We agree on how to behave, what to believe, what to value, what things to pursue in life. And he argues that a healthy society serves two functions for its members. First, it integrates its members, and second, it also regulates its members. So let me just talk a little bit more about what that is, according to Durkheim. So when you are integrated into your society, this means that the larger community makes you feel valued, makes you feel needed, makes you feel like what you bring to the table is something that everyone else wants. It makes you feel like you are connected, right? Both socially and emotionally. It makes you feel that this group, this society, this collective, this community does the work to make sure that you feel like you are woven into the fabric, that you are important, that you matter. If you stop showing up one day, people are going to wonder where you are and worry about you and hope that you are fine and follow up with you, right? You can't just disappear and no one will notice. You matter. So that's integration. Now, again, it's a very sociological perspective. This is work that the community does on its members. So integration is the first part, regulation is the second part, and so they go hand in hand. But let me kind of take us step by step there. So when you are integrated by your community into the community, it inspires a strong sense of belonging in you. And this sense of belonging in turn is characterized or engenders a commitment to uphold those social norms of that community. So the more I'm integrated, the more I deeply internally desire to uphold the values of this group, to uphold the behaviors, the interactions, the rituals of this group. I really want to participate and I believe in the things that my community believes in if I'm sufficiently integrated. And this is connected to regulation. So again, this is work that a society, a community does on its members, a healthy society anyway. The community helps ensure that every person clearly understands what's expected of them. You don't wonder how you're supposed to behave, if you're supposed to be polite, for example, or if you're supposed to value education, for example, you don't wonder, it's very clear to you what's expected of you. And when someone falls out of line and breaks social norms or disparages community values, they're punished for it. Now, it doesn't have to mean punishment like someone throws you in jail for 12 years, right? Punishment can also be a disapproving look from your mother. Punishment can also be the people that you normally have lunch with don't really have the time for you today because you've rubbed them the wrong way. Punishment takes all kinds of forms, including the formal ones like getting kicked out of school for some egregious behavior of violating rules or being incarcerated because you violated laws. So the community regulates its members by helping them clearly understand what's expected of them, and then exacting consequences when members of that community violate or go against the norms and beliefs. And this isn't all extrinsic, right? If I am sufficiently integrated into my community again, I have come to agree, I have come to believe in the same things that the rest of my community believes in. I freely submit to these norms and expectations, and perhaps I likely even believe I deserve a punishment when I've overstepped or misstepped or offended or violated the community norms in some way. So that's what a healthy society looks like. That's what a healthy society does according to Durkheim. Now, problems arise when communities fail or neglect to sufficiently integrate the members. This is, according to Durkheim, insufficient integration leads to all of these things that I have listed here. People feeling alone, they feel isolated, they feel adrift, disconnected from others, they feel unwanted, maybe irrelevant to the community. Again, like you could disappear and no one would care. They feel like the skills, the traits, the talents, the sense of humor, the wisdom that they bring are either unwelcome or unvalued. They feel like they just don't matter. And again, for Durkheim, when someone feels this way, the community is to blame for insufficiently integrating all of its members. Now, insufficient regulation, Durkheim describes as a condition where norms are eroded and social bonds are weakened, and he has a word for this. He calls it anomie. So anomie is described as normlessness, right? This is when you don't know what's expected of you, you lack social direction, you feel, again, you might use the word lost or even adrift, unanchored. The community hasn't convinced you to believe in the rightness of its rules and norms, so you might be experiencing moral confusion, unsure what you believe or whether you should or should not believe what everyone else believes. You might just feel lost too. This idea that you aren't sure what your place is in the community. You don't know what's expected of you, right? It's another way to think about that. And Durkheim also talks about, he uses this phrase, unchecked appetites. He argues that communities must regulate their members to understand what's possible. Because if we don't have our natural, as he would describe it, natural human impulses put in check, then we want all these things that we just can never have. And it's up to our community to make sure that we know what's possible, what's expected, what's realistic. Otherwise, we'll be in a constant state of disappointment. And that he also would describe as anomie. So these ideas that Durkheim lays out about how communities work and how communities are a collection of individuals that hold together, right? They're not just little individual folks somehow living geographically near each other. No, they're bonded and cohered, and they have a sense of collective membership into groups. And it's through these processes of integration and regulation that happens. Now, I take Durkheim's ideas directly to think about how belonging works on college campuses, explicitly with this idea that we need to recognize that it's the community's role to offer a sense of belonging, to offer that welcomeness, and not just welcome, but the sense that people matter, right? That's on us. That's the community's job. We cannot be expecting students to just show up and find their own belonging, to just come on in and search around and get some belonging for yourself. That's not how belonging works. I cannot just walk up to the door of a new group, bang on the door and demand belonging, right? That's not how it works. That group has to want me. They have to make me feel wanted. And that's a different approach than sometimes we have when we think about students and sense of belonging on college campuses. So in my recent study, this book that just came out, College Belonging, I asked first-year students, what does it mean to belong? And these are all kinds of answers that I heard. They feel happy, they feel welcome, feeling like I'm supposed to be here, safe, to have like-minded people around, to feel comfortable in your own skin, that there's no judgment. It just feels like home. A lot of students use the word home. A lot of students use the word comfortable to describe what it means to belong. Another thing that I discovered in these interviews with students is that belonging isn't this singular thing, and it doesn't happen in just one realm. A lot of times, scholarship on student belonging, or just the way we sometimes think about it in everyday life, we really often think about social belonging. When you've got that group of friends, those you found your people, when you've got your tribe, people describe it in all those kinds of ways, when you have others who genuinely make you feel like you are home, that you can be comfortable in your own skin, that you are valued for who you are. But in my study, students also talked about college campus belonging in these other realms as well. Academic belonging. This is when they feel competent and comfortable in their classes. Like they don't feel like everyone is smarter or outpacing them every time they turn around in class. They feel like they can hang with college academics. And they also talk about belonging not just among their friendship circle or their soccer team or their, I don't know, their dorm floor, but they talk about the wider campus and navigating kind of what we might think of public campus spaces, and talking distinctly about whether or not they feel like they belong when they're doing that, when they're sort of outside of their friendship corner and just navigating the campus more broadly. So I find all kinds of things, right? But I'll just say a few. Belonging isn't as straightforward as we might think that it is. It's not like students show up. I mean, everyone shows up new, right? And then at some point they find belonging either earlier or later, and they just kind of build more belonging, build more belonging, build more belonging. That was kind of the idea that I had about it before I started this research project, but that's just not how it works, it turns out, at all. There's lots of ups and downs. Some students have a strong sense of belonging in one of these three realms, but in neither of the other two. Sometimes they flip-flop. They might have really great social belonging for a while, and they might lose that, but then anchor down and find some, anchor down in their coursework maybe, and find some academic belonging. It shifts around, it moves over time. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now so I can just talk with you. So there's all kinds of interesting twists and turns, and not everyone gets belonging. Lots of students tough it out. They're gonna make it through college, belonging or not, and move on with their lives. And other students, the minute they set foot on campus, they feel at home. And belonging just kind of comes easily to them. So there's not much uniformity. I study first generation students compared to continuing generation students. And I definitely find that first gen students have more more obstacles in their path to having belonging offered to them. I'd be happy to talk about some of those common obstacles and the twists and turns. But the piece of this that I wanted to really share today is this emphasis that, especially for academic belonging and campus community belonging, it's us. It's us in this room right now. We're the community. We're the academic community. We are the campus community. It is on us to extend belonging to students, to each other, to not be stingy, but to be generous with making people feel like we're glad they're here. And it's not nothing. Sometimes it's easy to imagine that students need to find other students in order to feel like they belong. But I have it on good authority from about 186 interviews that in their academics and in their wider, like, just campus navigation, it's not just student to student relationships that build belonging. It's us too. So I'll leave us with that.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to open the floor for group discussion.
In particular, Lisa, I just loved what you said there and grounded it in the context of our university and the challenge that it's up to us to extend hospitality. I wonder what you heard, though, about what works. How do we make sure that our efforts feel hospitable? What strategies might you suggest?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm a faculty member, so a lot of my questions were sort of geared at what faculty can do in classrooms and in office hours. But so some of my concrete advice comes that way. But so in general, though, it's these small big moments too, but these small moments of interactions where we simply make students feel seen. When we pause for more than half a second to say hello, and we don't say like, "Hi, how are you? Whew, but got 1,000 things to do." But we stop, even if it's for 1 minute, like 30 seconds, but to really just stop. And it'd be wonderful if I remembered their name. That would be an extra huge bonus, right? But even if I don't, just to engage and to feel like you are not wasting my time. Anything we can do that sends that message, you are not wasting my time. I'm not too busy for you. I'm not too important for you. I don't see you as a waste of time. So fundamentally that, and there are lots of little ways that we can do that in our interactions. Yeah, like one of the strategies that I suggest is to try, it's really hard, but to try anytime someone asks you, "How are you?" Don't answer with the word "fine," but share one tiny little thing of your actual day. "I locked my keys in the car on the way here. It's been kind of a scramble today." Or "Actually, I'm in the middle of a really great book right now. Have you read this book? Oh my gosh, it's all like, I'm so distracted. It's all I can think about today is this book I'm in the middle of," or whatever, right? But some real tiny nugget that shows that you are willing to engage as a person. Yeah, I could talk for a long time about these things. So I'm going to stop there. But in terms of interactions, those are a few details.
I have a question for Esteban. So I may have fallen asleep during this part, but a lot of times you mentioned fearlessness. Could you talk a little bit about fearlessness and radical hospitality?
Yeah, I'm glad that somehow that filtered through, the drone of my talk as you're dozing off. Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, fearlessness. I started really talking about radical hospitality several years ago at USD, and I thought it was the way to. It was the Catholic language for equity. Equity effort. Having an equity mindset and equity agenda means, questioning a lot of the assumptions and routines that produce this structure of hierarchical, institutional manifestations. So when I was associate provost, I early on just decided, in order to get the institution to kind of think about these things, why don't we just make them Catholic, right? Because that's the one thing that can't easily be discounted. It can be debated, and I think a lot of the work that I was doing before I started, it was seen as outside of the mission and identity of the institution. It was kind of like what I started my talk with, like we do equity work in spite of our Catholicity, and a lot of students approached it like that. A lot of my colleagues in the faculty kind of approached it like that, and I just decided to turn it inside out, mostly for functional reasons, to try to get it done, right? I wanted it to get done, and I don't know how successful I was, overall, but I tried to come up with Catholic logics for a lot of the work. And for me, radical hospitality is a way of talking about equity. Radical hospitality is about change. The encounter provokes necessary change. And I used to use the analogy of a marriage, right? Which everyone can get married, so it's a wonderful analogy. Where when you join with your partner, you have to be better than just you. You're now something new. And that requires a kind of letting go of some of the stated and unstated commitments about a fearless way. It is defensiveness. It is an unstated commitment to inertia. That stops us from joining, and being open to change. To invite a speaker to campus that might really shake us up, like invite the speaker. So, I think fearlessness is essential. Give ourselves permission, to not be defensive, right? Defensiveness operates from a fear of change. And I think we have to be open to change, and our tradition. I think that's the whole point, whether you're Catholic or not. This tradition that we're aligned with, asks for that in very clear, ways, and even in gospel passages. So that's what I was talking about.
I actually realized that I do what Lisa recommended, which is to say that one word about how I'm feeling. I don't say I'm fine, but I do feel I bring people down. So, if you want to be welcoming, you don't want to be a depressive either. So I don't know what you say about that.
Well, I think it's about authenticity, right? I think it's really easy for people to recognize false cheerfulness when they see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels fake, and it means that you don't actually want to engage with me. So thank you very much for your friendly smile, but that means nothing to me if I feel like you don't mean it. So I say err on the side of meaning it, even if you're feeling kind of down. And actually, students really appreciate seeing us, right? They look up to us. We're figures of authority. Some of us who are in the classroom, they think we know all. We're so wise, right? At least their first year when they're on campus, they may come to some more skepticism as time goes by. I don't know, but it means a lot to them to realize, like, oh, she has hard days too. Or one of the recommendations that I have is to share stories of woe, to just have some stories in your back pocket on the tip of your tongue, not about now necessarily. You don't have to be that intimate with your students, but a memory from your undergraduate days, or if you work with graduate students, from your graduate days, of just some junk that you went through and how you survived it and what you learned from it. And if you fell on your face, even better, right? Students really appreciate hearing that they're not the only bumbling, stumbling idiots that are failing and flopping all the time. They appreciate that. So I say go for it, Noelle. Bring them down a little if you have to, but that that genuine response goes a long way.
I think Michael will confirm that every single time I've ever seen him, I say whatever.
Not every time, many times. I was really struck by that concept, Elisa, of enemy, and feeling lost or adrift, not knowing what's expected. And I've seen it, this isn't my insight, people using that word to describe what it's like to live in the middle of a pandemic, especially for young people who are deprived of social interactions, which are so important for them to come to understand themselves better. So that seems to be the reality that our students and us, to some degree or another, are living in. And so I wonder, what will that mean if and when we start to be able to move into more in-person interactions? So it's not so much that it's a result of integration falling apart, but it has to be rebuilt somehow.
Yeah. Well, they're two separate things, and Durkheim's theory, old as it is, actually takes like pandemics as an example of a driving cause of anomie. Political upheaval, economic upheaval. He says that these are the kinds of things that can cause like society-wide anomie. So I don't think we need to wait until we're in person. I think we can already do this work, right? Both the integration, but also the regulation. Here's what I expect from you, and here's why. Here's why. It's because I want you to come to class. We're holding, you can have any philosophy for asynchronous or synchronous, but here's mine, right? I'm holding synchronous classes because I want to see you here. I want you to be engaged. Like I'm going to do my best to make sure that you can really invest yourself in this class material and have opportunities to share your thoughts and ideas. I'm going to do what I can to make, but I need you here, and I'm grading you on it. And so as one like small example, right? But to just be super extra explicit, what are the rules and why is it important for us to follow them? When the pandemic first hit, I had my students, like we ditched some assignments that weren't going to be possible anymore. And one of the things they had to do was post to a discussion board every single week 2 things that they were doing to integrate and regulate their community, whether their family or whatever. And they were doing all kinds of things like scolding their siblings and neighbors for making jokes about the corona, like jokes about eating Chinese food, for example, like just regulating, like these are our values. This is the people that we are, and holding each other to it. That may not be as helpful as you were hoping for thinking about the switch to campus, but I don't think we need to wait till we're switching back to person. We can do it all now.
Looking at the idea of the sense of belonging as being a like regulated group, that the community itself would self-regulate, and how that would be opposed to the idea of radical hospitality, sort of breaking down power structures.
What a great question. I'll let others chime in too. But I don't see those two things as incompatible. If my community's norms and values involve taking in strangers and bringing them so deeply into the fold, even immediately, that we allow them to, as I've heard Esteban say before, rearrange the furniture and repaint the walls, and like if that's our community's norms and values, then those are the things that the community is upholding and punishing others for failing to do, for example. So I see it as kind of compatible, if I understood your concern correctly, but maybe Michael and Esteban have more.
Yeah, I'd hope that they're compatible. I think it makes sense that we would see them as opposed, because, confronting, hierarchies, universities are built on hierarchies. We are all about distinction. We confer degrees and promotions and statuses. We're just really culturally enmeshed in hierarchy, and I think that's where radical hospitality is asking for something different. And like, I'm not a theologian, okay? I'm not in any way, and I defer to people who study this, but I think for a Catholic university, when you go to the stories of the women and men whose lives were, depicted in the Gospels, it is countercultural. The stories are countercultural, and I think that's why Jesus uses, stories, because to go out and just say what he was trying to say, it would have, he would have been killed way earlier than he was. They're countercultural. And I think it calls for us to kind of think about how we organize ourselves and how we, are oriented, not just new programs or new person or a new center. Those are all well and good, but they don't do much to kind of confront the existing dynamics, inertia, habits, routines, the kind of cultural dimensions of our work at USD and in higher education that is built upon a system of meaning that we use to make sense of the world, right? So I'm drawing on communication here, that it's the stories that we tell that produce the world. And in those, those stories arrive from certain frameworks that we're socialized into, and really kind of calling that into question, and radical hospitality asks for us to call those things into question. Instead of something, optics, I think with this larger discussion about belonging and equity, like optics wins every time. We are satisfied with looking like we are welcoming and looking like people belong and looking like we're advancing equity and inclusion, and that's good. If it looks good, that's good. But is it tied to something that's deeper? A real engagement and confrontation with the habits and routines that bring us to our work instead of just the work itself. And I think so. Again, I'm walking away from your question, but I'd like to see them together. But there's a lot of inertia that we have to confront in order to get to that place where there's synergy.
I think that anchors so nicely on what Michael was talking about, right? This recognition of the dignity of the people around us, right? And it's something about tapping into and recognizing and honoring and acknowledging each other as a creature of dignity who I want to have around me. It's that feeling, right? That feeling that it becomes, or like is one way to describe a sense of belonging, or how we might offer and extend a sense of belonging. And yeah, the radical hospitality part, if I'm understanding, like my understanding of it means that we don't hesitate. We just don't hesitate. We don't decide if you're one of us or not one of us, and then embrace you.
To Esteban's point a moment ago, what I was thinking when you rightly talked about this enterprise being countercultural, I was just thinking you're absolutely right. In part of the reason that's so challenging is our students come to us deeply enculturated in a hierarchical understanding of the world. I can't think of how many times I've told incoming students, newly arrived students, the best way to fit in at USD is to be yourself. But I don't think they believe me. And why would they? Because their experience has taught them otherwise, that the best way to fit in is to figure out where I fit in the hierarchy and to play my role and to work my way up. So just reflecting on the fact that we are so hierarchical, we do meet our students' expectations in some ways because of that. And yet we want to be different. I think it challenges us to redouble our efforts because our students are, even though they don't know it, expecting us to be what they already have experienced, which is hierarchical, and to have a power difference at play in most interactions.
Yeah, and there's this really important distinction between fitting in and belonging. I actually attribute the articulation of this to Brene Brown, if any of you are fans, but she articulates it beautifully. Fitting in is when I figure out how I need to morph and mold myself to shove myself into the acceptable shape that it has been made clear to me this community requires, or I won't be a part of it. That's fitting in. And belonging is like what my student said, being comfortable in your own skin. Michael, I just love what you said. The best way to fit in is to be yourself, but that just, how can our students even imagine a world where that's true? When this other form of fitting in, reshaping and molding yourself to an acceptable form is what the rest of society often demands. And again, for me, the resounding piece that I always keep coming back to is that it's misguided for us to try to tell our students, you are worthy of belonging, believe it, own it, live it. No. We have to show them that we want them, and we want them to be their authentic selves. And when they show up as their authentic self, that we love it. And we want them to come back again tomorrow exactly as that authentic self. We can't just put it on their shoulders to understand that they deserve belonging. We have to, I describe belonging as a gift. We collectively have to give the gift of belonging.
I want to thank our three wonderful speakers, Doctors Lovette-Colyer, Del Rio, and Nunn. And thank you for everyone who attended, even attending a little bit longer since we went over a bit. And I hope that you will join us next week, same time, same Zoom link, and we will explore radical hospitality through the perspective of homelessness and housing insecurity. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good night.